Welcome to Quietly Confident Introverts, the podcast that empowers introverted women leaders and entrepreneurs to overcome self-doubt and build confidence to thrive. Together, we'll explore your unique strengths, help you create a presence in the marketplace, and build profitable, impactful businesses. It's time for introverted women to rise, and it starts right here. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Quietly Confident Introvert. This is a great podcast if you are an introverted woman in business and leadership who wants to build confidence, harness your strengths, and achieve your ambitions. And today I'm really excited because we'll be talking about embrace uniqueness, finding your way in a world of uniformity. Of course, we all know that it's so easy to be conditioned without realizing that you have been conditioned to act in a certain way. And many of us find that we end up doing things that other people want us to do. And we've talked a lot about the fact that we are living in a world where there's an extroversion bias. So that means as an introvert, you do have challenges just because of that extroversion bias. So today, that's why we want to talk about embracing your uniqueness. I want you to find your way in the world, build your confidence, express yourself as an introvert confidently. And it's exciting times again, because it's not just me you're going to hear from. And I'm always excited when I can have rich conversations. And today I'll be having rich conversations with Katy Lumsden. She's known as the self-proclaimed noisy introvert. She's a HR professional, leadership and followership facilitator, and currently the head of human resources at the National Library, Ireland. She has a passion for finding and using the unexpected spaces between what she calls liminal spaces, where boundaries are moved and transformed. And she also has a passion in facilitating a sense of empowerment through self-inquiry. So basically, I'm really, really excited also because we connected as co-authors of the Amazon best-selling book, which is leadership. It's a leadership book, and it's called The X Factor: The Spiritual Secrets Behind Successful Executives and Entrepreneurs. And I have to tell you that, yes, it was a bestseller, but it's still there on Amazon. I decided to make sure that I checked it out. And we are still 537 in psychology of creativity and genius, and 571 in modern philosophy, 646 in adult and continuing education. So we're still making an impact. And we came together because we wanted to share a different perspective on leadership. And today you'll be hearing that perspective. And you'll also be hearing Katy dive into some of the words I have used that you will be intrigued by. What's a noisy introvert and what's liminal spaces? So we're looking forward to that. So I want you to be prepared to be inspired and equipped with knowledge that propels you towards a more courageous and conscious existence and leadership. I want you to stay tuned to this transformative conversation. So let me bring on my guest right now that I'm excited to introduce to you. Welcome, Katy.
Patience, thank you so much for having me. What a treat this afternoon. It occurred to me that although we interact a lot, we're on social media together a lot, this is probably the first time we've had a kind of a face-to-face actually since the book project. So it's really exciting to be with you, and thank you for the invitation.
Yes, and thank you for accepting to come over as well. I think that when you circumvent the world as a human being, you meet some interesting people. When you do the kind of work we do, bringing those people to meet other people that you want to impact is such a way of the multiplication that we're meant to be doing in the world. So I'm so glad that you're here today, and you will bring some new perspective that will help our audience. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. And already, Patience, it's such an interesting thing to hear words that you've used and things that you've said reflected back at you, and even in your intro there, to hear some of those words and concepts, things that I include with my bio, or if I'm presenting myself or if I'm at a conference or whatever, to hear those things reflected back with the kinds of questions that other people have, it immediately, it starts my synapses firing all over again. And that's the joyous cycle of connection, I guess, is that, that back and forth, that conversation that happens even without knowing. It's a very elevating thing.
Mm. And yes, that like you said, how people ask you questions. So we're going to ask you a very important one now. Why do you call yourself noisy introvert?
Oh, yeah, good question. It's funny that, yeah, I put that on my headline on LinkedIn, and it grabs people actually. And so I've left it there. That came about through almost a throwaway remark that was not necessarily meant very kindly. And it wasn't directed entirely at me. It was to do with a particular group that I had the good fortune to fall in with, and we had a very active and engaging WhatsApp group at the time. And the company that I was in, we had reasoned by virtue of the study we were doing together to be doing some exercises around introversion and extroversion, and that always prompts conversation, who is who and who is what, and the introverts were on that side of the room and the extroverts over there. And the WhatsApp chat was pinging one evening, and somebody said, would the noisy extroverts ever shut up, basically? And I thought that was very funny and very clever. But then I thought, do you know what? That perfectly describes my kind of introversion. And I kind of stole that because it worked so well. I thought that, in 2 words, that's the perfect descriptor for me, because I had, I'd done the MBTI assessments. I've done that a couple of times. I don't necessarily advocate always, putting people into little boxes and leaving them there. But for me, that exercise was very informative. The first time I did it was maybe 20 years ago, a long time ago. And it was the first time I thought, okay, this is really rather wonderful. This indicates to me there isn't a right way to be in the world or a wrong way to be in the world. And it's what you said about the extroversion bias. Not having known those terms really or understood what they meant, to suddenly, find, okay, this is my way of being. I'm an introvert, and in the Myers-Briggs assessment, they nearly don't have room on the measuring chart for my kind of introversion, way over there. But I realized, that was the first time I realized, introversion, extroversion is not about whether or how much you like other people. It's about where do you go to recharge your battery. So for me, yes, I'm an introvert, but I love people. I love chatting. I love connecting. I love, I'm just back from a conference. I've spoken to about 15,000 people, all in a state of, excitement about the conference topics. And I love it. That feeds me. But when I'm tired, when the battery goes
off.
Yeah, then that's when I need my introvert, my bat cave to go and, and it blew my mind to find that for some people, they recharge their batteries by going to a party.
Yeah.
And so, wow.
I cannot even understand that, because and the truth is, when we can't understand something, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Like you said, it just means that it's a different way of being in the world. It's a different perspective of being in the world. And, I like the fact that you adopted that word, although it was used for extroverts, because you're right. I talk a lot. I talk for a living. I enjoy having conversations. If I'm on stage, time can fly by and I wouldn't even notice. But of course, after I've done that and I've taken in the energy of the people around me, or even on webinars and things like that, I realize that I kind of need 3 days or 4 days to recover. And I'm thinking, why do I need so much time? And I guess it's because that's what it is. It's more than, for some people who are introverts, there's also, like you said, the scales that are used to measure don't are not always an exact science. So
Yeah.
when you put yourself in a box by those scales, you're kind of like limiting yourself. It gives you an insight about yourself that allows you to dive deeper below the surface to understand yourself better, which I think is great. But, that also brings me to the second question,
Mm.
which I was intrigued by when I saw it, when you talked about the spaces, liminal spaces. And I want you to expand on that because I checked it up and I think it has a great meaning that would be useful for people who are trying to find their uniqueness and, in the world that we live in.
Yeah, and again, to hear those words back, things that I use and I've put them in my bio and things like that, liminal spaces. So liminality is really, it's about being on the threshold of something. It's like a doorway or a portal, but it can also be those gaps between. And I often think of that in quite concrete terms. My undergrad was in visual communications, and it led me into a whole first fabulous career based on calligraphy and lettering. And one of the important things that we learned very early on, I went to art school. That's what brought me to Dublin, actually, was to come to the National College of Art and Design. And when we did our very earliest classes in typography and letter forms, we really were encouraged to focus not on the letter, but on the spaces between them. That's what makes a word legible, really, is the way our brains work. If the spacing is right between the letters, we nearly don't see the letters. We're actually looking at what's called the negative space, but those spaces between. And I often have that picture in my head around that idea of liminality. It's not that that space is wasted or useless or empty. It's that oftentimes that's what's giving meaning to the things that ordinarily we see. And I think the more you can tune into that, the more you can look for the spaces between. They're the places that really, I love to get into those. They're the places that afford opportunity. They are, in a way, it relates to polarities. It allows continua to develop, without there being an either or. It's not that you have this thing over here and this thing over here, and there's an unbridgeable gap. It's that this piece in the middle is full of energy and life and a kind of a dynamism that connects those two things on either side. And it's useful for all kinds of things. It's useful for conflict resolution. It's useful in leadership, but just in general for it increases the space. Who doesn't want that? Anywhere, in my human resources practice, for example, we're often, particularly the sector that I work in, we're very policy bound, for example. So we can often get into the mindset of, show me the policy for that, show me the 2 lines where that is enshrined in a document somewhere.
Yeah.
But actually, I had this conversation with some executive level colleagues this morning and saying, the real leadership and management is not disregarding that, but saying, okay, there has to be some workable space in there that isn't one thing or another. And that can be very difficult and troubling in the human resources space or any kind of governance arena. But if you do it well and do it carefully, it affords, I think, opportunities where there weren't any before. It can bring conversations to bear that couldn't have happened otherwise. And it just, it's that space improving thing or space enhancing thing. And it's just.
I do like, not to lose what you were saying. It's the reason why I said human resources needs to be renamed to human empowerment, and to look at to look at things differently, because when you think of resources, sometimes our brain immediately says finite, and
Yes. Yes.
there is scarcity within it. But when you talk about those spaces that you're talking about, it's like that's the space between this and that. That at the time the policy was written, and the people that wrote the policy, they always would have limitations in them. But then you
Inherent.
meet a dynamic human being in front of you, and what some people do, and I always feel this is so sad, is HR professionals, sadly to say, they would go, that's the policy, that's what it is, and that's kind of like, to me, sometimes a cop out, because if you explore the dynamism of that person in front of you, and you think about not just equality but equity, and you think about the uniqueness of someone, you can bring to bear something that works, and it's a win-win. I've always used that for Steve Covey, where he talks about the win-win. if
Yes.
you have the win-win approach, you can explore those spaces. And I like what you said about the space has meaning. It's not a void. It's not empty. So when we are making, and this is useful for self-awareness, because if you're not the finished article and you're making this journey to reveal your potential, then that space between who you are right now and who you want to be in
Yeah.
future
Yeah.
is full of answers. So, I was running a workshop a while back, which hopefully I'll bring back, called Closing the Gaps.
Mm.
And it's all about asking yourself, what are my gaps? And the gap is not empty, it's related to what you're trying to achieve in life, who you
Yes.
want to be in the world. And so by exploring those gaps, automatically you're empowered with, like, I have purpose because I can just figure out how to bring to life what is in that gap. So that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? So I like what you've just said with, and having those conversations. So you are human empowerment. Maybe that's not human resources.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's the essence of what I try to do. And I think we might get into this a little bit later, but um thinking of what you said earlier about courageous leadership, for example, it's really there's something that connects those two concepts together, the liminality and the courage and the leadership, because it demands of you that you pay attention, that you're
Mm,
vigilant, but that you're not afraid of the emergent, that you don't need to have everything sorted because it can't be.
mm,
That's opening the door to all kinds of possibilities. If, as a leader, if you can say, I don't need to know all the answers. I'm going to engage. I'm going to see what's in that gap
mm,
and see how that changes the people who are all, in the gap or looking into the gap. It changes us, we change it, and then something else happens that may be completely unexpected.
yeah.
But through another set of self-inquiry, I'm equipped to respond to that in a way that doesn't crush it or doesn't predetermine it or doesn't have a pre set container to shove it into.
Mm,
It's allowing it to be itself, but at the same time creating some wonderful new framework to
mm,
carry it, and then to allow the creativity to happen in a different way. So
indeed.
that's an
Mm.
important facet of leadership for me, for sure.
It does well, like you said, creativity. And again, I think one of the challenges we have is being governed a lot by fear. So we kind of control things too much. And basically, that then brings me to the question, you wrote the chapter, like I said, our bestseller. I keep saying it's a bestseller. Go check it out on Amazon. And your fantastic chapter, you say it's titled Still Here. And you talk about mental health and postpartum depression, which you consider to be a gift you had to accept. So basically, what you're saying now around having fluidity, allowing people to look into that space knowing that people will see different things in that space and being willing as a leader to explore it. Of course, it's interesting that your awareness of how, because it's a leadership book and you put this in the book to kind of explore how leadership is not one way that people think, oh, I've done all these degrees, I have all these things. It's a journey, and a journey from things like mental health and postpartum depression to get to quality gift that leads to leadership. So I want you to share how this gift shaped your acceptance of yourself as well as embracing your uniqueness instead of conforming to typical definitions of who you're meant to be and leadership.
Wow, what a great question. Well, that's a big question. Yeah, it was funny when we were around the time that we would both have been approached by Kaylee O'Keefe, who published the book. It was coming up to the time when my daughter was celebrating her 10th birthday. And there was some synchronicity in that for me, because after she was born, she was fine, I was not. For a number of reasons, and perhaps for no reason at all. I very quickly became very, very unwell with postpartum depression, to the extent that I didn't want to be anymore. And it wasn't that I wanted to disappear. I've said it in the book. It was like complete obliteration, that I was never here at all. And the 10-year point was important for me, because the very slow kind of crawl back out of that, I said that I'm actually setting myself 10 years. And it sort of sounded ridiculous at the time. I was like, that's a decade. But something in me was saying it is going to take you that long to regain some kind of state of equilibrium. So it was such a synchronous thing that this book project came up. And the book actually was published within just a couple of weeks of my daughter's 10th birthday. I had met depression before. I suffered for a long number of years with very chronic clinical depression. So I kind of knew what it was, but it's a phrase that I use in the book. I think postpartum depression has a very particular savagery to it, because you are suddenly in a position of, having to nurture this tiny being. You have no time for you. You have no, and your energy. That's the way it should be. Your energy is in nurturing this tiny new being. And if you can't do that, it spirals. And I really couldn't. I absolutely couldn't. And I describe in the book almost looking in at myself, kind of sinking, like through water. And what I hoped I would find at the bottom was nothing. I thought, I'm just going to sink and sink and sink, and I'll be gone. But, and this comes back to the liminality point, what I found right down in the absolute depths, and the only way I can describe it, the comparison I had was like those amazing pieces of film of the ocean floor where nobody has ever been before because it's so deep. And actually, it's not a dead space. It's a very much alive space with all sorts of fascinating creatures. And I should contextualize this in, I have a sort of not particularly conventional Christian faith, but I do have that. It's been knocked about a bit, but in some shape or form, it's still there. And I had such a strong sense as I reached what I thought was the bottom of this dreadful ocean, that what I met was God. And I don't mean that in any airy, fairy, fluffy way. Some people might call it simply interconnection or universality. But for me, it really was almost not exactly a voice, but a kind of imperative that, right, okay, you're here now. It's really good to meet you, because now I meet you as you, utterly real. And the bit that was really challenging for me was in this space of absolute universality, interconnection, God, higher power, whatever you want to call it. I was challenged to not do anything. There was no action I could take that was going to get me out of this. But almost like the communion kind of exchange, take, eat. There was nothing I could do. There was nothing I could give. I had to accept something. And again, this was my own faith putting an interpretation on this perhaps, but the being that was engaging with me, or the entity or the universality that was engaging with me in those depths, knew that there is nothing I can resist less than challenge, doing something new. And so what was offered to me was, okay, you have no reference point. You have no bearings. They've all gone. Everything you thought you knew has disappeared. What are you going to do about that now? And it was like this sense of challenge was thrown at me. And that was the gift I had to accept. I hated it because it was like accepting something that was going to nourish me and nurture me. And I didn't want that. I wanted to disappear. But at the same time, I couldn't resist that. It was like the challenge of, okay, right, how are you going to get through the next 5 minutes? And how are you going to get through the next half an hour? And it was that kind of call to challenge and call to accept that was the gift in that for me. And it was tiny, tiny steps, but it was, I suppose that was the balance. The depression was so awful that there was no kind of saying, right, okay, I'll get through today and then we'll look at tomorrow. I couldn't do that. It was literally minute by minute by minute, like literally kind of hauling my way through those minutes. But in that, every one of those that I got through, I could go, okay, that was a challenge that was offered to me as a gift. And I did it. And now let's see if I can do another one. And so that's how it built. And it was that sort of having to accept that I couldn't actually do anything. There was no, I'm a very action-oriented person usually. There was no fixing this from that point of view. But the fixing it came from going, okay, I'm being offered this gift of challenge. And it's nourishing me. Like I said, that's not what I want right now, but I can't resist it either. And that's the gift that was in there because I did it.
Yeah, I like some things that you said there, and it reminds me of a story by one of my mentors, spiritual mentors. She had a journey of being abused literally by her father, Joyce Meyer. So she was used by her father for sexual, pleasure. And he gave her to the friends, and her mother was complicit in the whole thing. And she grew up that way. So obviously she had to find herself in that definition of how, when parents do that, obviously that's a difficult journey. But there was a catalyst so when I first encountered or found her that really made me follow her as a mentor. And she said there was a day that usually she would go to the mirror, she would cry, she would say, oh, I'm fed up of this life, I can't seem to get through. And there was a day that she actually said, "Oh God, I give up." And she said she had a voice that said, "Oh, thank goodness, finally." she was
Mm.
like, she was like, "Oh, God cannot be mocking me." But then she said she heard again the voice say, "I've been waiting for you to give up because now you let me do my work. You let me get on with helping you to achieve what you're meant to achieve." And there is a part of the Bible that definitely says that his strength is made perfect in our weaknesses.
Yeah.
So it's those times that we are down in the depths. He knows the depths, he knows the valleys, that darkness, and a lot of people experience God as light. So when you get into darkness, that is when there's opportunity for light to really feel strong for you. And a lot of people talk about being present as nice, airy, fairy stuff, like be present when you're on the beach. I've even said it like I wasn't
Yeah.
present when I was on the beach. But also, I did say it's because I was focused on some negativity that was going on the inside. But I like that what you're saying here is you had to be present. You had no option. You had to be present because
Mm.
5 minutes was hard work. So if you were not present, you couldn't get through 5 minutes. If you were not present, you couldn't get through 30 minutes.
Yes.
And what it then did was allow you to figure out how you become present. So that's like embracing your unique way
Yeah.
of becoming present in a world that has been challenging, and you probably were not looking at, I don't want to accept the challenge, I really don't want to be here anymore.
Mm.
So now the question is, you have to be present with this world that you don't want to be in anymore and accept the challenge. So I like all of that, and the fact that it allowed you to look inwards. It allowed you, and I understand now why you had to have that space, because that space had answers, but all of us are afraid of what's in that space. So if you're taking people through coaching as well, one of the things I realize is that sometimes coaches are afraid to go to that depth.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I remember, as I'm doing my studies for executive coaching at the moment, the senior level,
Yeah.
and I remember that we had to have coaching sessions, peer coaching sessions. And what's interesting was that because I was developing my coaching capabilities, I started to, and I had already been doing it with clients. I was going there. I was going there. There is where people are afraid to go, and I
Yeah.
was getting reactions. So my our mentor and supervisor was like, "Patience, you went there."
Yeah.
There. But the beauty of it was that every single person then that I coached got results because I kept going there. I kept, and there was one that they said, "I've never seen um, XYZ not have a word to say," but but they had nothing to say because you went there. And
Yeah.
so, it's also a gift when you're a spiritual person that you can have God or the Spirit help you to go there if you're willing to let go. So what I can hear from you is letting go. And that kind of brings me to kind of the next question as well, which is all these things. It's a leadership book. You put it in a leadership book
Mhm.
because it had progression. And I like what you said about the 10-year gap, because many of us think, and I erroneously had thought about that in that way. So in 2020, for example, 2022, I suffered burnout,
Yeah.
and I started to then reorganize my life. Got to this, I got into 2023 and I'm thinking, I should be okay by now. I should have fixed it. But then I'm reading things like burnout is something that when you get there, it takes longer to fix. And it's actually radical changes to your life that you have to make. And it's uncomfortable because there are a lot of things you're going to have to say no to. You're going to have to get familiar with your body, and it's also in inward and outward. So what I took from the book as well, you talked about until you had your challenges, you thought of leadership as an outward looking role and more the ability to look in on other people than to look in on yourself, being yourself, inviting others to do the same is what you class as leadership, and that's difficult because, like I said, you have to get people to go there to be able to look at themselves first. And being a HR professional, that might have also been that's also a challenge, isn't it? When you're talking to executives, you're talking to managers, you want to say to them, look at yourself first, then help people to look at themselves. So how do you so when we talk about courageous leadership, what part does it really play? And in your view, what do you think courageous leadership is? And then what part does it then play in helping people to really see leadership as inward first before outward? Because people want to control the outward without looking inward. So, my question, just to summarize it, is what is courageous leadership to you? What part does it play in helping people look inwards to embrace their own uniqueness and also give people permission to be unique as well?
That's a brilliant question. Courageous leadership. The thing that comes to mind most, and it's something that, because it's very resonant for me, it's a very inward looking thing, and it's around understanding your personal values. It's not that long ago, it's only a matter of maybe 3-4 years ago that I first did a facility, or I had the benefit of being part of a facilitated workshop around discerning personal values. And it's a very simple process, but I hadn't come across it before, where you, in effect, you're choosing from a long list of maybe 200 words, and which of them resonates with you, and you kind of hone it down to maybe 20, and you think you're doing really well, and then the facilitator will say, okay, now half that. And so you're looking at this list again of values and attributes, and you're going, okay, which of them, some of them mean slightly the same, but that one doesn't quite resonate. So you're already into a kind of a self-inquiry process, because you're really having to tune into that visceral response to words, essentially. And then you get to 10, and then the facilitator will say, okay, we're going to half that again. Get this list down to 5. So then you're really honing. And so I did come up with a list of five things, 5 words that when I met them in that context, I thought, bingo, that is me. Those are my non-negotiables. Those are my things that actually I can see now are kind of my pilot light. They're the things that are guiding me. I know Brené Brown says you should get that list down to 3, but I haven't got there yet. And actually, Patience, I'm sure you will remember that great day, the launch day of our book, where we actually knocked Brené Brown off the top of one of those international categories. I remember that. I still have a screenshot of that glorious moment. I think we dislodged Brené Brown and Matthew McConaughey from the number one spot.
That was exciting, isn't it?
It was very exciting. So I haven't got my Brené Brown list of only 3 of those core values, but I think 5 is good. It works for me. For me, they are excellence, professionalism, courage, fairness, and growth. And equally, somebody else could have the same set of 5 that mean something different to them. So they're very personal, and they resonate differently for different people. But I know, for me, being my non-negotiables, like they're the things that I won't give up. And I think that's where courageous leadership comes from. If someone is saying, I have this set of guiding principles, and I'm not prepared to let go of them, then real bravery comes from that space. And interestingly, a thread that I've been kind of pulling at since I was working on my MBS, that kind of, it's not exactly a flip side of leadership, but I've got very interested in thinking about followership. And again, thinking of polarities and liminality. Followership is a concept that often people are quite challenged by. And I've facilitated workshops with children, for example, where some of the children have refused even to talk about it on the basis that I'm a leader, not a loser. But actually, that understanding of followership as something very active and engaged, and that also draws on a value system, a personal values system, you can see really, really courageous leadership coming through followership,
Yeah.
which seems counterintuitive without really grasping the wholeness of those two concepts and the dynamism and the fact that they are totally interconnected. But for example, there's somebody that I follow and I'm connected with on LinkedIn, a guy called Sal Nassim, who posts a lot of interesting content, but he had reminded us all the other day of Muhammad Ali's stance in relation to the Vietnam War, for example, for which he was vilified and imprisoned, or the prison sentence was instituted against him, and he led from that kind of followership position because of the personal values that he held that he could not relinquish.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of, I suppose that's what I mean when I think about leadership being connected to self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Without that, it's kind of an empty space, actually.
Yeah, that is some brilliant words you use there, and talking about non-negotiables and values being non-negotiables. I think a values exercise is really a great way to meet yourself. And like yourself, I felt that I had to find my non-negotiables. I have a very simple way of helping people find it, because being part of the Maxwell leadership team, we created what is called, the founder of the team created what is called Maxwell DNA. And basically, Maxwell DNA is what are the key guiding principles of this organization. And everyone in the organization can take it and see how they fit into it and which of the values. And actually, they actually then put up an award where you could decide that one of those DNA elements is what you are standing with and live by. And so you could present your case to win an award on it. And they awarded people for each of those categories. And that was quite, so I got used to and conditioned to that. But then that made me think about my own.
Yeah.
And I started off with loads like everybody else, because many times the exercise is treated, especially in the corporate space, like a buzz thing to do. Let's get it done.
Yes.
So in some places. Well, how do you then live it? And how do you then recognize that the people working in your organization need to buy into it as, an overarching value, even though they can still exist within that space, having their own non-negotiables. So for the organization, it's a non-negotiable, because for example, if I go and build a company, my non-negotiables are what will be the governing non-negotiables of the company. But within that, there are people who have different ones. Mine are faith, family, and freedom. So I brought mine down to 3.
You did it, yes.
But that is for personal. So I cheated a bit, because I now split my personal and my business. So I have a business that, when we talk about limited liability, business is separate from you, but although it's part of me, so my business one is integrity, excellence, and empowerment. So what I say is, when you experience me, you experience my personal values on a one-to-one basis and how I live my life, and they are non-negotiables. But also, when I do business, these are the guiding principles. I like what you said about them being non-negotiables, and it's what people remembering that a values exercise is so important to do for that reason, for an organization and for an individual. But the other thing you said that I like is the followership. Now, the best leaders have once been great followers, because many people follow, the people that they admire, and imbibe some of their principles and everything. And they come from a heart of service and serve leaders and somehow they progress through that to the next level, to the next level. They will make the best leaders. And if you think about companies in the UK, Tesco, for example,
Yeah.
one of the leaders in Tesco started from the shop floor. One
Yeah.
of the leaders in Max, many of these big companies, a lot of them started from the shop floor doing the nitty gritty stuff before they went up. And those are kind of the best leaders. There are very few things you tell them about the struggles at the shop floor that they don't already have firsthand experiences of.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like how you have looked at courageous leadership. Now, like I said, courageous leadership is something I talk about a lot. It's a framework I decided I wanted to develop because introverts tend to shrink from leadership because the typical view of leadership is loud and proud and out there, and
Yeah.
whereas introverts then think, I don't like to be in the limelight. And to be honest, it's not about the limelight. Your presence as a leader alone in a room is enough to get people. It's like my son, when he was little, would give me a good punching when he needed something. As soon as I said dad is on his way, he'd be like, I'm so sorry, I never will do that, mom. And I'm like, just the mention of dad is making you quake. And then my husband comes in and he goes, how are you today? And then my son will be like, please don't tell him. Thank you, I'm begging you. And then sometimes I feel no matter what I do, he's not going to take me seriously. So I definitely will be mean and tell dad. And dad will you do that. And he'll be like, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But will you ever do that again? Never, never. And it's like, and that works. So sometimes leadership is not necessarily you're out there, you're forward, and he doesn't have to raise his voice. He just has to say, will you ever do that again? I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So courageous leadership, I defined it as a courageous leader is what people hope for. They guide and fuel creativity and courage in their followers. When they shine their light in challenging times, they give others permission to do the same. And I think courageous leadership in the world that we live in today can be lacking because people just want to pretend that that challenge doesn't exist. And you've talked a lot about challenges already. You've talked about embracing those challenges, meeting yourself. Crisis is one of the big things that causes us to meet ourselves and challenges. So, in order for us to bring this to an end and everything, we've shared a lot of deep things. And people be thinking, "Phew, I want to lie down." So no, but we want to give them some takeaways to leave with. And if you can share maybe 3 key things that you feel that encompass what we've been talking about today. And our topic today was embracing your uniqueness, finding your way in a world of uniformity. So are there 3 key tips that you would give our audience to leave with that would be useful for them?
Oh, let's think. Well, I think having just spoken about it, I would absolutely encourage everybody, if it's something that they haven't done already, to seek out or find for themselves some way of doing one of those values exercises. They're available online. You don't have to go to a workshop to do them, but just to discern those non-negotiables for yourself, because what they do for me is, when I'm presented with a particularly complex set of challenges, or even when I'm tired or stressed or busy, I take a moment and I recalibrate, realign to those values. And suddenly it takes ego out of that. And then you're in service of something and leading from that position. And I don't mean like big high level executive leading. I just mean day to day leading yourself through the day. And hopefully, that has directions out to other people. If you are doing that from a place where leaning into your own pilot light, your own non-negotiables, is going to help you take your ego out of it all and generally progress on a interests over positions basis. I think that's generally to be highly recommended. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I think actually, and this is something that I hadn't understood for a long, long time, is that actually in your uniqueness, and you used that word radical earlier, there's a kind of radical not doing involved in that. And it's just, you don't need to do any growth. You don't need to do any development in terms of your uniqueness. You can do the self-inquiry in terms of that values piece and other things. But your uniqueness, your presence, your you-ness, it's there.
Mhm.
It's just there. And I think if I had understood that earlier, my life, well, who knows, my life would have been different. Because, yeah, you don't need to go on a mad scramble of change or development in that aspect.
Mhm.
It just is. And there's an enormous peace around understanding that.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I would probably, if I could go back and tell myself that, then I would do it. So that's a second thing, that kind of radical not doing, which is
Mhm.
kind of a relief because, we're all busy, and to think that
Yeah.
there's some enormous value in not doing, that's kind of a comfort. And I suppose slightly related to that, it came up, and again, this is around the introversion piece. And I give huge credit to you and Joanna Rawbone and Sheila Abiola. And there are a few people who are really talking about introversion and helping those of us who are introverts to really be quite conscious about managing our energy and how
Mhm.
we navigate our paths in the world. And I think for a long time, not really understanding my introversion, I really
Mhm.
thought, I would just, when things were overwhelming, I just want to disappear.
Yeah.
And I met that in a huge sense when I had that dreadful episode of postpartum depression. But again, it's that sort of message to a younger self, even perhaps, that nobody moves through this world silently.
Mhm.
So whoever we are, it's that not doing piece. We are blazing a trail regardless.
Mhm.
And you use the analogy of light quite a lot. And I love that because that's how I picture it in our interconnectedness. If we're blazing a trail, that is interacting with somebody else, and their world looks different because of that. Our world looks different because they are
Yeah.
doing the same, and we don't have to try. We're not examined on it. We're not tested on it. It's not
Mhm.
something you pass or fail. It just is.
Mhm.
So again, it's because we're here. Ubuntu. That's what
Yeah.
that is. I am me because
You
you are.
are you
Yeah,
because you're you.
yeah.
So I definitely like these 3 points. And just to reiterate for the audience, everybody needs to seek out and find what their values are, because those values are things that when you lose your core, and they're at your core of who you are. So when you feel like I've lost my core, I've lost my way, you can realign, you can recalibrate to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So the second one is understand that you are, and so your uniqueness is there. Not It's not something someone can give you through personal development, or I get personal development, but not professional is always skills, and a lot of
Yes, yes.
organizations focus on professional. If there's more fluidity to focus on personal,
Mm,
in the midst of it, people will find that uniqueness, and it's that uniqueness that they use to make the biggest contribution to the workplace. So find your uniqueness in a sense of maybe exploration and evaluation of yourself.
mm,
So that's more better. Then you talk about understanding your introversion. So if you're an introvert, One extrovert is important to understand. MBTI, for example, has 16 different dimensions.
Yeah.
And if you say you cannot find your your dimension as tightly as possible, it means there's still exploration there. So find your in terms of understanding who you are, how you show up as an introvert in the world,
Mm.
what the strengths you bring, because we all are different. Well, what are the specific challenges that come from your introversion? We all have different ways that but also we're a combination of the environment, the genetic makeup,
Hmm.
and maybe the experiences that we've had.
Yeah.
So, despite being an introvert, you might grow up in an environment that is enabling. So you don't have all the same strengths, all the same weaknesses that people who are introverted might have. You've learned to deal with it. One example is Richard Branson, who talks
Yes.
about how his mom nurtured his introversion despite him being introverted and how it's helped him to show up in the world the way he's
Yeah.
shown up, and the fact that it's brilliant because of the things he does that most people he says things like, oh, get on and do it. If someone offers you an opportunity, do it and figure it out as you go
I
along.
love that. Yeah.
Come from how his mom brought him up
Yeah.
and how he shows up in the world. So the three things: seek and find your values, explore your uniqueness, and not in a way that is intellectual,
Mm.
but exploration of yourself, and then understand your introversion. So really, thank you so much, Katie, because it's been a nice, deep conversation,
It
and I
has.
hope that people have taken a lot out of it. But as usual with our show, I always like to leave with a quote. And there is a very nice quote that we can finish this week, which is coming from your chapter in our book. And it says, the delight of the journey ahead of me is to accept that as we each exist, we're transformed by interconnection and resonate differently and resonate differently. A limitless constellation of falling stars, each one the light by which the hearts of others see. I'm going to say that again. The delight of the journey ahead of me is to accept that as we each exist, we are transformed by interconnection and resonate differently. A limitless constellation of falling stars, each one the light by which the hearts of others see. So take a deep breath and see yourself. We are all interconnected, and we all need to resonate with each other. The sun, the moon, the stars, different forms of light existing in the sky in nice harmony. So you are a light. How are you shining your light and letting others shine their light? That is also courageous leadership, whether in the workplace, whether in your daily lives and in your relationships. So thank you so much, Katie, for having the last word with your quote as well and giving us an extra with it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patience. What a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you again for listening and taking the time to listen to this. I know you might have to rewind and listen to it over and over again to get some deep messages that we've shared. So, if you want to unlock your introvert strengths and you want to build your confidence, remember that, and as well as embracing your courageous leadership, I'm always here. You can connect with me and let's have a conversation about how you can live in the world and embrace your uniqueness without having to conform to extroversion bias. So thank you again, and thank you for listening. And make sure that you share this with other people. Take care and God bless. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Patience.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Quietly Confident Introverts. If you found today's discussion valuable, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with others. You can also connect with me, Patience Ogunbona, at the Visionary Introverted Woman. Until next time, stay confidently introverted.